Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My special guest today is the executive editor of the Washington Post, Marty Baron. Marty, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, you're famous because of the movie Spotlight, of course, and you had Liev Schreiber playing you. How was that?
It was great. You know, look, I mean, I had somebody playing me who was 4 inches taller, much more fit, and a lot better looking. And so when people hear my name, they're going to think of him. I can't complain. But he did a great job of playing me, and I think the other actors did a tremendous job, and the director and the screenwriters were fantastic as well.
How true to real-life events was the movie?
I think it was very faithful to the sort of arc of that investigation. Obviously, it's not a documentary; it's a movie. You have to compress things into 2 hours and make things dramatic. But it brought forth the major themes that occurred over the course of that investigation. And they spent a lot of time doing a lot of research. They went through all the court documents. They talked to all the reporters who were involved. They talked to the survivors of abuse. They talked to just lots of people. And they brought up things that I didn't even know about in our newsroom and elsewhere.
That they found out in their own research?
They did, you know, partially because the reporters and other editors weren't necessarily telling me everything. Here I was a new editor in Boston, and I didn't have any sources within our own newsroom. And so they weren't necessarily volunteering everything that they were saying among themselves.
So now that you're executive editor at the Washington Post, have you cultivated some sources?
I've tried to cultivate some sources, but still, people don't tell me everything, that's for sure.
Well, that's not a total surprise. So,
it's okay.
Given your background in political journalism, investigative journalism, and of course the experience at the Globe, what has that done? What have you brought, you feel, to the Washington Post?
Well, you know, I hope what we've brought is sort of a spirit of accountability for our politicians, our policymakers, the most powerful individuals and institutions in our country. I think that is that's at the root of what the Washington Post is. If you go back to the Pentagon Papers and the Watergate, those are stories that established the reputation of the Washington Post, and we've been wanting to sort of reinforce that. That we are an institution that tries to shine light in the dark corners and hold our most powerful institutions and individuals accountable.
And how about the challenges of a changing population, of the internet, the fact that almost every newspaper in the country has lost subscribers? Talk a little bit about how does the Post face those challenges?
Well, we've been doing actually quite well. I mean, I think print circulation obviously has been on the decline. Young people are just not turning to print to get their news. They're getting their news off of social media and off of mobile devices. And so we have transformed ourselves to be a true digital news operation, to be 24 hours a day, provide alerts in the moment, to sort of present stories in a way that really works on digital platforms, a variety of digital platforms, even things like Snapchat. So. And we've actually increased our subscribers digitally. So while print subscribers has gone down, digital subscribers have gone up dramatically, particularly over the last several years. And that has produced a significant turnaround in the financial fortunes of the Washington Post.
So just quickly, in terms of paywalls, different models where publications often will say, we're going to give you a month free if you sign up, or the first month is 99 cents or whatever. Are you confident that the online revenue is going to be sufficient to sustain journalism at the level you're talking about, as opposed to simply sustaining the corpse of a publication?
Well, I'm confident it can for the national news organizations. So us, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal.
Because you have millions and millions.
Well, we can draw from the entire country and in fact from the entire world. Right now, of course, there are many people overseas who are keenly interested in what's happening in the United States, what's happening with this current administration. So we have subscribers all over the world. Locally, it's much more of a challenge. And I think that local news organizations are still struggling to figure out what is it that they should be covering, what should they stop covering, what kind of coverage is going to cause people to subscribe, encourage them to subscribe, and they're working at it. I do think that at the center of that actually is investigative journalism, or accountability journalism as we sometimes call it, because The public supports that, and they recognize that if newspapers don't do that, nobody's going to do that. The same applies, let's say, to a local television station or, let's say, a public radio station. They can do that as well, and people will step up and support that kind of work because they do want their public officials to be honest. They do want someone watching them. When I was in Boston, frequently, whenever we did a spotlight investigation, and that was the name of our investigative team, I would hear from readers who would say, thank God you did this. If you hadn't done it, nobody would do it. This is why we need newspapers, and this is why we need the Boston Globe, and it's why I subscribe. And we increased the size of our investigative staff largely on that basis because we were hearing from readers that they really supported that. And if you look at the reasons that people subscribe to news organizations like the Boston Globe, a disproportionate number of them subscribe because of the investigative work they do. And so we need to do more of it, and we need to do more ambitious work as well.
All right, we're going to talk about that when we come back. We'll take a quick break, and we'll return with Marty Baron.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harbor. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harbor Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
The Aaron Harbor Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post. So Marty, a lot of people, you talked about where they get their news. Certainly a lot of people get news from places like Facebook, for example. And Facebook often has a lot of news from different newspapers, to put it politely. Where are we in that process in terms of other entities using the product of publications like the Washington Post?
Well, a large number of people do get their news off of social media. Facebook is very prominent among them. Google and Google News is very prominent among them. Reddit, Snapchat, all sorts of places like that. And we're basically okay with that. We want people to know where they're getting their news. We want them to understand which news sources are more credible based on their history, their tradition of providing credible news. For us, it's over a very long period of time, many decades, almost a century at this point. So that's what we want people to understand where are they getting their news. But we are fundamentally fine with people getting their news on social media, although we would like them eventually to subscribe to us. And we do put limits on how many stories per month they can get for free on social media. But it's incredibly important that the consumers of this news understand who is providing this news. Is this a reliable source of information? Does this institution have a history of providing trustworthy information?
All right, speaking of history, almost a quarter of a century ago, a guy named Craig Newmark created a local list in San Francisco. It became Craigslist, obviously national in scope. What has been the impact on the Post of Craigslist and similar offerings?
Well, Craigslist had a tremendous impact, not only on the Post, but on the entire industry. The reality is we used to have very large classified sections. They were the most lucrative form of advertising that we had in the business. They provided untold tens of millions of dollars in profits for newspapers. It's the reason the newspapers were so thick, and people went there to find their sofa, they went there to find their jobs, they went there to find their cars, they went there to find all of that. Craig Newmark created a different model with a relative handful of people. He was able to provide all of that information largely for free online, and it completely disrupted, and maybe that's not even the word, it exploded the entire business model of many newspapers. In fact, pretty much all of them. So that was huge, had a huge impact, no question about it. And it's something that we probably should have seen coming. We should have tried to prepare for that. But I'm not sure that there's much we could have done really to prepare, because the reality is that it was free and we were charging, and free is likely to win over paid product when you're offering the very same service.
Yeah, and especially actually in some cases a better service being online.
Absolutely. It's more easy to search, for example, a lot easier to search.
Yeah. The paper, the Washington Post, was purchased by, of course, the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. How has that been for the paper? And just tell me your experience, both in terms of the purchase and with Jeff.
Well, it's been a fantastic experience, and he's been a wonderful owner of the Washington Post. He brought both financial capital and intellectual capital. Everybody focuses on the financial capital because he's a wealthy individual, but it's not just a matter of the financial capital. It's at least as important that he brought ideas. One of the fundamental ideas that he brought to us was that we should change our strategy for the Washington Post. Prior to his acquisition, our strategy was defined as being for and about Washington. Obviously a recognition that we were in the nation's capital and we would write about politics, but fundamentally we were a product for people who lived in the Washington metro area, so DC, Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Maryland. So he came in and he said, I think this is not the right strategy. There isn't really a great business model for regional publications at the moment, and you have the opportunity to be national. The internet has inflicted all sorts of pain on newspapers. But the internet also offers some gifts, and the primary gift that it offers is wide distribution at virtually no additional cost. And you have an opportunity to do that because you're in the nation's capital. You have the name The Washington Post, which is a name that can be leveraged to national and international dimensions. And we don't need to go have a retreat to figure out who we are. The identity of the Post was established at the time of the Pentagon Papers and the Watergate, and we're an institution that believes in shining light in dark corners, and that's our identity. And so with that, we immediately changed our strategy to become national and even international, and that's made all the difference in the world. Now, executing on that was not necessarily easy, but we've done that successfully. We have more to do. There's a lot of work yet to be done, and our business is changing dramatically all of the time. There's new technology coming along. At the time that he acquired the Post, we didn't have voice-activated devices, like Alexa and Google Home and Apple's HomePod and things like that. So things are changing all the time.
All right, speaking of changing, let's talk about the state of journalism. There seems to be more hostility towards journalists today than there has been in some time. Talk a little bit about that. Why is that, and what can be done about that?
Well, there is, in fact, more hostility, I think largely because there's more polarization in our society today. We've become very tribal in the way we are in our politics. And it's either you tend to believe the information that is good for your tribe, and if it's information that seems bad for your tribe, you dismiss it. And that's true of both the right and the left. And people have very strong opinions. And we're kind of in the middle. Certainly for us, we try to be an independent source of news. We're not associated with any party, and we're not associated with an ideology. And so you try to be independent. But we have a very polarized and contentious society today, and we feel the effects of that in the same way that other institutions do. I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not just trust in news organizations that has declined, trust in the press that's declined, but trust in just about every other institution in society, even including religious institutions, major business, things like that. Perhaps the only institution that really has not suffered a significant decline is the military, but all the others pretty much have. And so we're in the middle of that as well, and people are upset if we publish something that contradicts their pre-existing view of the world.
All right, we're going to talk about one person's view of the world when we return, and we'll be right back to wrap up with Marty Baron.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
I'm Aaron Harbour, host of The Aaron Harbour Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harbour, host of The Aaron Harbour Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harbour Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment with Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post. So I've been absolutely fascinated with how Donald Trump, from the day he announced his campaign, and it seems that journalists can barely keep up with him. What's your take on the president?
I think he understands the media very well. He's a master of the media and exploiting the media. He grew up as somebody who did that. I mean, throughout his time in New York, he was always in the tabloids. He had all sorts of sources. He would feed them stories. He was one of those anonymous sources that he criticizes today. He was a big one, as a matter of fact, including about his own life. You know, he actually had a persona where he pretended to be someone named John Barron, who was his public relations person. But there was no John Barron. There was only Donald Trump. He was the voice, and he would call people up and feed them stories. And then, of course, he had The Apprentice. So I think that he understands the media quite well, and he's been able to exploit that knowledge in a fairly sophisticated way.
How does the Post deal with the fact that when you look at, for example, when the president tweets, maybe 1 or 2 million people actually of his Twitter followers see the tweet. But then when it's repeated on television and in publications, that number can grow to 50 million, 100 million. In some cases, studies say it can actually grow to 200 million. So here you have a president who criticizes the media, but is adroitly using the media to get his message out to maybe 100 times more people than his original effort to propagate it.
Sure. I mean, he has whatever it is now, 40 million plus followers on Twitter. So presumably there are more than 1 million who are seeing the original tweet, and then they are sharing that with others. And then certainly the media writes about it as well. And so, yeah, that's a very effective tool for him. He can circumvent mainstream news organizations, and he understands that. It's a very powerful tool. There's never a powerful tool that he wouldn't take advantage of if it serves his interests, and so he sees this as a very powerful tool, and he's definitely taking advantage of it.
So what's the Post's obligation when the president issues a tweet or series of tweets, and you know that statements in those tweets are clearly false, inaccurate, or misleading?
Sure. Well, we should say they're false or misleading, and we do that. We do that prominently in stories. We do that in headlines now. We have a very active fact-checking operation. There are 2 people who work full-time on that, more than 2 people that work full-time on that. But I don't think we can just sort of say, well, we're not going to cover it, as some people suggest. I mean, he is the President of the United States. He is arguably the most important person in the world. The tweets are in fact, a window into his mind, what he's thinking of at that moment, and they do find real-world expression in the policies that he later advocates. So I think to ignore those tweets would be silly and irresponsible on our part. I do think we have to put them in proper context. We do have to call them out as false when they are, and many are, and that's what we endeavor to do. But you know, whether we call them out as false or not, many of his followers, his true believers, it doesn't matter what we said about it. They're going to dismiss our take on it. And they believe pretty much anything and everything he says.
Have you been, final question, have you been surprised at the success the president has had in attacking the special counsel and reducing Americans' confidence in the special counsel. Because if you look at the numbers from 12 months ago versus today, you're looking at an extraordinarily sharp drop-off.
Yeah, a pretty significant drop-off in confidence in the special counsel's investigation, for sure. I don't know that I'm completely surprised by it, because I think we had a lot of evidence that the president would be attacking the special counsel. I mean, look, he likes to fight. He's always been a fighter. He was a fighter as a kid. That's why his parents sent him to military school. And then he fought. He hired Roy Cohn to fight for him. He was very much informed by the view of Roy Cohn that is, if you're hit back 10 times harder. And he applies that to everybody, whether it's the press or the special counsel or the intelligence agencies or the courts or you name it. He just believes in fighting. And his father told him, don't be a loser. And he sees the world, I think, in the terms of winners and losers. So he will always fight. And the presidency is an incredible bully pulpit, and you can have a tremendous impact. And of course, he has his followers and people who believe in him. And to some extent, they're not necessarily exercising independent judgment. They're basically relying upon the president to tell them what they should think about that. Because they have confidence in him. And so I'm not entirely surprised that if day after day after day the president goes after the special counsel, that there would be a declining of confidence in the special counsel's investigation. In the same way that if every day after day after day he goes after the press, there's declining confidence in the press. Because that's the objective of what the president is doing. That's what he's trying to achieve, and he does understand the power of his platform.
Well, certainly the special counsel isn't responding and feels that he can't respond. But the press can, as it sees the decline in confidence. What else, and we talked about this earlier, but is there anything else that the press can do to, I don't know if the word is reassert itself or build confidence on the part of the American people a little higher, or at least stop that decline?
Look, I mean, the most important thing is that what we report be accurate and that it be validated over time. Keep in mind that at the time of Watergate, the press was under attack too, by President Nixon, his first vice president, Spiro Agnew, who ultimately had to leave office in a corruption scandal. The press was viewed as having, and particularly the Washington Post was viewed as engaging in partisan activity to bring down the president. So it came under a lot of criticism, and public opinion of the press was declining. But it turned out that what the press was reporting was correct, was true, ended up being validated over time. And so much of what the press has reported has already been validated over time. So much of what the president has said is fake news has turned out to be true, sometimes proven to be true within a matter of days. And so it's important that our work be validated over time. But it's also important, I think, for us to be more transparent about how we do our work, that we talk about who we are, what we represent, what we stand for, how we go about our work, show more of it, show more original documents, show more videos, show more of whatever we can show. And I think it's important for us to talk about the good that journalists have done over many decades in this country. First of all, it's important to keep in mind that there isn't a single democracy in this world today, and there never has been a democracy that did not have a free and independent press. So we cannot expect to continue to have a democracy if we don't have a free and independent press. And I don't think we should give up our democracy easily, that's for sure. So I think it's important that we talk about the good work that journalists have done. You know, there's a lot of talk about forgotten men and women of America. Journalists have been covering forgotten men and women of America for a very long time, looking at abuses of power that affected ordinary people. We should talk about that more, and we should talk about the good that we do.
Do you think, just from your perspective historically, and being a journalist and being in the business for so long, when you look at the president and, for example, the accusations of the deep state, that it seems that no matter what may come forward factually, there's a response that his followers believe, and that verified facts don't seem to matter perhaps as much as they have in the past or as they should. So that even if you're doing, I guess my point is, even if you're doing great work, it's not necessarily going to be recognized as such. It's not necessarily going to be seen as valid. And if you're being attacked by the president as fake news, that undermines your credibility in the first place. Is that different than anything, I guess two questions. Is that different than anything you've seen in your career, especially at this level? And number two, are there any special ways you can address it outside of what you've already mentioned?
Well, I think it's certainly true, and it's certainly different from how it has been in the past. Look, there are many presidents who criticize the press, going all the way back to the founding of the country.
They all hated the press, I think.
They ended up hating the press for one reason or another, and I suppose that's to be expected. Look, we shouldn't be a propaganda arm of the government if we're doing our jobs properly.
I think this president has a different opinion about that.
Well, I think he does have a different opinion, and he's said that if you see any negative polls, they're not true. They're fake news. I mean, that doesn't make much sense. And in fact, he said just the other day that, talking about Gallup, that if there's a negative poll, it should be illegal. Now, I'm not sure I follow that argument, but that's what he said. So I think it's important that we do our work day in and day out. It's true that the president is doing everything he can to undermine the role of the press as an independent arbiter of fact. And it's not just undermining the role of the press, it's undermining the role of other institutions as well. Undermining the role of the intelligence agencies, undermining the role of the courts, undermining the role of universities with academics who really study these issues, undermining the role of scientists when it comes to a variety of subjects, including climate change. And so, and that his view is that he alone should be the person to tell you what's true and what's false. But I think it's important to remember what our Supreme Court justices have said in the past in embracing the First Amendment. And it was in 1945 that Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson said that every person should be a watchman for the truth because our forefathers didn't trust government to decide for us what's true and what's false.
So, final question. You just listed a litany of well, I was going to say sins, but certainly accusations against the president. And certainly the Washington Post has had stories on each of those. Has the Post ever done a story combining those, showing that series of attacks and what institutions are being attacked, what individuals are being attacked, and put that all together in one picture? Because I think that's such a powerful picture, such a powerful picture you just drew. Has the Post done that?
We have not written that story, but thanks you for the story suggestion. Maybe we should do that story at some point and put it all together.
Yeah,
because that is what's happening. I mean, I don't think it's an accusation as much a statement of fact. That's what he's done. He's challenged the courts. He's certainly challenged the intelligence agencies. He's challenged the investigative agencies like the FBI. He's challenged universities. He's challenged scientists and called into question their objectivity. And I think that what the effect of that is to obliterate the very idea of objective truth. And I believe there is a truth. Every day that we walk into our newsroom, we see the principles of our news organization that were established more than 8 decades ago. And the first principle is to tell the truth as nearly as the truth may be ascertained. And that tells you that finding the truth is a process of striving, that the truth can be elusive, but that there is a truth, and that it doesn't just depend on somebody's opinion. It's not a matter of just opinion. It's not a matter of who has the biggest megaphone, and it's not a matter of who has the most power. There is the truth, an independent truth, and it's certainly our job as journalists to do our best to try to find that.
All right. Well, I look forward to that major story.
Okay.
Marty,
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. That was Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.